our next guest was lucky enough to spend some real quality time with Bob Cole. The book, Now I'm Catching On, My Life On and Off the Air, by Bob Cole, penned by longtime friend Stephen Brunt, who joins us here on the show. Stephen, how are you, pal? This is a real treat. I wish it was under better circumstances, of course, as they say, but it's good to see your face and hear your voice, pal. How you been?
Yeah, it's been a long time, man. You must have lost my number, right?
But and for no real reason.
I'm available now, right? I'm a freelancer. I can do it anytime. I can do anything with anybody.
Well, see, I don't know the legal how that
sort
works. I don't want to get people upset, but people have been clamoring for you to come on the show. People are already, the chat is going crazy here. People are pumped to see you. We'll get to Bob, not to push that to the back burner, but how you been? What's life been for Stephen Brunt? It's been, 2 years, I think, since we've caught up.
Yeah, well, I think, yes. It's been about almost 2 years since I was last in my former gig, and I'm trying to remember what the timing was for you guys. So yeah,
similar. Yes,
similar. We're kind of on the same timeline. Life is good. Working on a bunch of projects, some of which are kind of invisible because they have to be legally, and some fun stuff, doing things I want to do, and otherwise still living my life, going fishing, going out to Newfoundland in about a month, and all's well.
Rhett's going to need some fishing details. Where are we at? How's our fishing game?
This winter to catch some bonefish? Or
I did get some bonefish. Yeah, I was down in I was in Belize, and I was in Little Cayman for a bit, and I'm going down. I'm going down to Florida tarpon fishing in a couple of weeks, down to Isla Mirada and the Keys. So, yeah, that's
no one does it better.
I promise eventually you have to work to pay for all this stuff, right? So. I'm trying to kind of the work-life balance. I'm way on the life side right now, so I got to figure this one out.
Yeah, it all balances out, Steve. And I mean, at this point, I think it's all going to work itself out for sure.
Thanks.
So I guess take us back because you've done a lot of works, a lot of books, favorites of all of our. I mean, we've talked a lot about the Ali book. We've talked about Jordan Tutu and your trips up to
Bob Orr.
Up north, Bobby Art. You've done some incredible work, and we're incredible fans. Give us the timing, the I guess the point of the career for Bob. Obviously, it's getting near the end. You get, I guess, a little bit introspective when you put out a book of your life. You probably feel like, oh, we're around in third, maybe time to put a book together. Give us the timeline on when, and then how it came together.
I got to say with Bob, I don't think he ever thought he was round in third.
Okay.
Bob, right up until his dying breath, probably thought he should have been on Hockey Night in Canada calling the games. He did not surrender easily. I knew Bob from being around the press box for a lot of years when I was at the Globe and Mail, and then later with Sportsnet, obviously, but mostly when I was at the Globe, and I would see him and talk to him, and he knew about when I started spending part of my life in his beloved home province of Newfoundland. We talked about that a lot, and we knew a lot of people in common in Newfoundland, and I always liked Bob, and Bob liked me, and I say that last part because I don't think he liked everybody. He was kind of he was a character and a bit of a cantankerous guy, kind of did things his own way. But I really did like Bob, and we did some stuff. We shot some stuff with him at Sportsnet around the time before his departure from Hockey Night, and but around that kind of career retrospective stuff. So we shot the producer George Skoutakis and I went out to St. John's, and we shot a long form interview with him, and we went to his house and did some things. And so I spent a fair bit of time around Bob later in his career. And, he started telling me the stories, the non-hockey part of it. And again, the other thing is if somebody's a Newfoundlander, Bob had a whole other life out there before hockey. He was the first guy to read the news on television in Newfoundland. Television came late to Newfoundland, but so this is way before hockey. And he was the host of Reach for the Top in Newfoundland, which was a big deal apparently in Newfoundland. So people out there knew him on an entirely different level. And he had all these, he'd gone off and went on a steamship, a passenger ship, leaving St. John when he was 13 years old, worked on a ship sailing the Caribbean. He was a curler. He curled in 2 Briars for Newfoundland.
As the skip.
Yeah, he was a skip. He was a coxswain in the rowing race, the Royal St. John's Regatta.
Jeez.
You know, the guy with the megaphone. Like he ran a fish plant at one point. He ran a fish plant while he was on Hockey Night in Canada. He'd go home in the summer and run his fish plant. So there's a lot of Bob stories, and obsessive Frank Sinatra fan, and salmon fisherman, great fly fisherman for salmon, love to fish. So yeah, we talked about it, and I kind of I didn't have to twist his arm too much, and but I thought there was a book there, and then I hung out with him a lot to get that book done, and a lot of it out in St. John's, in his hometown. So yeah, I loved him, and this aside from how great he was as a play-by-play man doing hockey. Like there's other guys who have been really good, and historically, Danny Gallivan, who was a big friend of Bob's. Obviously, Danny Gallivan was great, and people go back and talk about Foster Hewitt, and the guys who do it now are really good too. But there's a genius in the way Bob did the game and called games that I was just listening to those clips that you ran, and a lot of them in the last couple of days. And the beauty of what he does, and I think it's underappreciated, is the fact that, hockey doesn't stop. It stops for faceoffs, it stops like that, but it's a game that flows. And it's not like he knew that Mario was going to do that.
Exactly.
And the fact that he could anticipate something that was about to happen, and kind of raise the emotion and raise his voice and build the excitement, and then nail it in the moment. Like his calls and big goals, like the Joe Sakic goal in 2002 at the Olympics. Again, it's not like he knew Joe Sakic was going to score the goal that clinched the Olympic gold medal for Canada, but he pulled that out of himself, and it's like baseball, there's lots of time to think about it. Football, there's lots of time to think about it. Hockey, you've got to kind of be in the flow. And he always talked about feel and flow, that's what it was all about. That's what Foster Hewitt taught him. And I think it's true. I think no one's ever done that better than Bob.
Yeah, there would be technically stronger in terms of the X's and O's and identification and maybe talking about systems, but Bob was the artist, not the technician, right? Like what he did.
Ryan, that's bang on, right? Like it wasn't about the information conveyed. Although I got to tell you, he was meticulous, like in terms of notes and prep and talking to coaches and getting the lines and especially the pronunciation of names. Like he was obsessive about getting that right. He spent time. Unsuccessfully, he tried to convince Zach Parisi to pronounce his name the way his dad pronounced it.
Right. I heard a story from a guy who was working color with him, and it was during a break, and he's in the producer's ear. Dominic, is it LaChance or LaChance? Because they're in the guy in the Nordiques, he's LaChance, and this guy is LaChance. Somebody find this out for me. So we would Dominic. We still do the Dominic Detroit. We still have that kind of thing. So to hear that he was a stickler for pronunciation that hits home for me.
And you better not mess with it, right? Like he took that stuff. Anybody who kind of crossed him, like Bob was a bit of a ferocious character in his own way. There are some stories back in his, youth about, some confrontations he had with people. He had he was strong too, like physically. I know he's kind of not a big guy, but he had kind of crazy strength. Like there was one story about somebody, I forget what he was pissed off about, but he was pissed off about something, where him sitting in a car and reaching out through the window to somebody who was annoying him and pulling the guy into the car through the window and laying a beating on him. So yeah, you didn't want to mess with Bob, even when he was, 85 years old. You didn't want to mess with Bob.
Sure. Yeah, and it was back going back in the old days when I was at the rink all the time, and you'd be working the games and all of that. It was always a big thing, and for us, it was never Hockey Night in Canada's in town tonight. It was never that. It was Bob Cole's in the house tonight. And there was Don Cherry, and Don never really left Toronto until the playoffs, and Bob was generally in Toronto. But man, when Bob Cole's in the house, you knew it was a game that night if Bob Cole was in town.
Well, and he would bring it, right? Like there weren't a lot of dull games when Bob called them.
Yeah.
Even if they were dull, he brought a level of entertainment to the games. He again, very, he's a very quirky dude, right? Like the guys who worked with him on color, like Harry Neal, obviously was kind of the best of those. I think they really worked very well together, and he kind of was a great counterpoint for Bob with his sense of humor. But yeah, if you work color with Bob and you stepped on something he was trying to say, or you ignored him when he gave him the he did the Heisman, right?
Yes.
He'd stick out his hand and say, "Okay," you can see him in one of those clips sticking out his hand. That's shut up. So he was very partial to, color guys who knew when to shut up and let it breathe.
Yeah.
And Bob was very good at letting it breathe. Not just what he said sometimes, but it's in the moments when he chose not to say anything.
Yeah.
That's hard, right? If you're being paid to talk. And but yeah, I say, if you kind of worked on Bob's terms, he was probably great. But if you didn't, he would be a very hard guy to work with.
Yeah. I was saying yesterday, and it's with Newfoundland and the same Peter Marr, the longtime radio voice of the Flames, he'd have the same thing. And I remember that was for me to sit in the press box one of the first times and just kind of watch people. What does the game look like from up there? I'm watching Peter. I'm half on the game, half watching him kind of do his thing. And when they would score, the hand would go up, the Flames, the whole thing would go through, and then he would bring it down. And that was Mike Rogers. Okay, you're free to go. You can start now. So,
no, it's an art. It's a very strange art form. It's and you can tell some guys have a knack for it, some guys don't. I think, and again, this goes back to what you were saying, Ryan. Really, you can call a game accurately, and there's a lot, and there's lots of great play-by-play guys out there, but at a certain level, it's like when Ernie Harwell was doing baseball, or one of those, or Vin Scully for sure.
Scully.
Like at that point, it's like music, right? It's like a musician improvising. It's like a jazz musician, and and I think with Bob, that's the level it was at.
Yeah, I do too. It's a great point that I think you nailed it, Pinder, because you think about it from a musician standpoint. There will be some people who will be a better pianist or a better guitar player or whatever, better singer than Bob Dylan, but Bob Dylan pretty popular, and Neil Young didn't have the best pipes in the world, but yet there he was. I think it's tough too, because it's a business where, much like there's now 32 teams, but to do Hockey Night in Canada, there's very few of those jobs.
Mhm.
And from the day Bob Cole would have taken over, there's somebody trying to take his job. And there's another young guy every year, every 2 years, every 5 years, there's another crop of young broadcasters who are coming through. And and it's no disrespect to any of Chris Cuthbert, I think, is fantastic. He's one of my favorites. And Jim Houston, you think of all the guys that came along, but none of them were Bob Cole. And even near the end, I still felt like he may miss something, or the name might not be right, but no one brings energy to the game and makes the game sound and feel more exciting than Bob Cole. To be undisputed, still the best at your craft after so long. There's not many parallels to that, I don't think.
Well, and Boom, he used to do, even in that last season, he was still checking it. He had air checks. Like he'd listen to his games after he'd go home to Newfoundland and try and see if, how did I do? Like he was still doing air checks. And I got to say, one thing, because now that I'm unaffiliated, I can say these things. When Rogers bought the rights, when they bought Hockey Night in Canada, one of the mistakes they made, I think, and you could say that, Hockey Night in Canada at that point needed a bit of a refresh, right? I'm not saying that it didn't maybe need a little bit of oxygen pumped into it. But, they bought a 60-year-old Canadian cultural institution, and then they didn't quite know what to, they had people in-house who kind of wanted to, who resented it, right? Mm-hmm. They kind of, peed on the old institution, right? They wanted, they just wanted to change it because we're not the CBC, and that's how, the people on the outside always resented Hockey Night, right? Because Hockey Night was the great Saturday night thing. And part of that, what they got for their money was Bob. Yeah. And, Cherry as well. This would have also applied to kind of the way that they worked, and again, I'm not going to go back out over Cherry's firing, but when they tried to kind of bring him to heel, right? They said, okay, we're bigger than, we're bigger than the institution. We're bigger than Don Cherry. But with Bob, obviously he was late. It was late career, and he was, and he wasn't, he made mistakes that he wouldn't have made when he was a 60-year-old. But, I don't think they valued him. They didn't value what they had. Like there should have been, and Bob resisted retirement talk, tributes. He wanted to work, and, he left kicking and screaming. And every year after he was gone, I get, he would be watching those games and thinking I should be there.
Yeah.
I should be calling. When Jim Houston came over and, part of his deal was he got the Stanley Cup Finals. Like, Bob thought he should be calling the Stanley Cup Finals because he's Bob Cole, and he's done it forever. And he's the guy. And I think that they should have valued him more and valued his history more and valued what he meant to people more rather than saying, out with the old, in with the new. It's time for change. I think he was disrespected. And I say some of that's behind the scenes. It's all behind the scenes. But and I say Bob's a cantankerous guy, not the easiest guy to work with. Wasn't going to go out, like meekly like a lamb and take his retirement tour. And then that's not him.
Yeah.
But man, that's and I see all the tributes now on Sportsnet, and that's great. But
be great if he were here to see them.
Bob was here today to tell you what he thought of that.
Yeah, it'd be really cool if he could see the outpouring of emotion and love for this guy. And it's all sincere, right? I don't get I didn't really like, I think people, when you get emotional from hearing those calls, and Rhett, you will know this. The other thing that was always cool when Bob was in the building, and you would have seen more of it probably, Stephen, if you were at, being that he was in Toronto all those times. But when Bob would walk by in the bowels of the rink, players would come out to show their respect. They would want to, Mr. Cole, I'm Mr. Rhett Warner, I'm who, right? And of course he knows who they are because he's the play-by-play guy. But Retro, you would have seen that all the time.
That's what makes me emotional, is knowing those moments, because they did happen. They did. The respect that certain guys had downstairs from calling it so professionally and so well and painting those pictures that we got to be part of and enjoy, but without those voices, everyone else, it's not the same, right? Yeah, the scenery is the same, but the picture's not the same. And they did. There's certain guys that walked around downstairs, and you said it, when Bob Cole was in the building, you damn well knew Bob Cole was in the building.
Yeah.
And you were pumped to know it.
Yeah. From a broadcast staff, from our side and from the player side, it was a big thing. And all of this is going to sound like it's a shot, but I do think there's a lot of very good broadcasters, a lot of good play-by-play guys. But your point is in baseball, you've got a lot of time. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of you can prepare, you can know when a moment is coming. There's a lot of, it feels like it's contrived. There's some, just put that in, there's just stuff that's already pre-planned and that's their signature. And Bob Cole was never trying to be part of the event. He was never, I'm going to nail this call with this phrase that's going to be legendary. That was never. Joe Sakic scores. Surely that's got to be it. That's not planned. It's in our brains forever. But it was simple, and it's what we were hoping, and surely, God, please, surely that's got to be it, right? All of those calls, I don't know that there's anything that's overly eloquent, but they're there for the rest of time, and they're perfect.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. Of course, people like, one of the things Bob hated were people doing Bob Cole impressions, by the way. So anybody that come up to him and start babying him, man, it bugged him. But he didn't ever want to talk about the "oh baby," right? Because it wasn't a catchphrase. Like, you think now that that's one of those things. Well, okay, I'm going to wait to throw out my, and we all know guys who have those, right? Where it's like they've put their patent on it, right? They want to make T-shirts. But Bob, Bob's "oh babies," they didn't happen as often as you think they did. But when they did, they came from here somewhere. It wasn't like you thought, man, I better put one of my tags on it, because it goes back to the idea that he wasn't the show. And I know he was part of the show. If you listen to those clips, that he is part of the show, but he wanted to kind of, Foster told him, years ago when he actually kind of cold called on Foster Hewitt at the radio station in Toronto. Foster had no idea who he was, some guy from Newfoundland. And Foster listened to his tape and talked to him. And he said, if people leave the game, if people turn off the game and they're talking about the game and how great it was, and they don't mention you've done your job. And I think that's how Bob thought of his role. I know that's how he thought of his role, that we're talking about those games and those great goals and those moments and those great players. And, and again, it's great that Bob is getting the credit that he deserves for what he did. But, Bob would want you talking about Mario and Joe Sakic and Gretzky and Lanny, and not about him, because that to him is how you define the job.
It's funny you mentioned that sort of transitional period where Sportsnet gets a 12-year national rights exclusivity, the monopoly. We're going to reinvent Hockey Night. They sort of lease CBC's airtime. Ron McLean sent out and dusted off as if he's done. Didn't take long to realize, he's sort of in that Bob class. When he talks, it's poetry, it's rhymes, it's the Mayor of Chilliwack, and this hook from a Tragically Hip song. He sews it all together. But look, I was always a huge Jim Houston guy, and I thought that was your tactician, your technically sound broadcaster who would make zero mistakes. And Bob was the artist, but Bob was making more mistakes. That's a really tough spot to put someone in, because what can Jim Houston do more when he doesn't make any mistakes ever? And Bob's misidentified something, yet has this, he can do the whole symphony thing. That's a hell of a spot to be in. And I think they blew it on the host, but I understood that sort of battle of who's going to be our lead play-by-play guy. It wasn't prime Bob when that occurred.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, and again, it was tough. It was not Jim's fault that he got the gig. He got the gig on merit. And,
yes.
He's, as you say, he never made a mistake. He was a, technically perfect play-by-play guy, and called some great moments and great games himself. Right. And Bob was, 80 something years old. Right. So yeah, there's got to be a transition there. And I understood that. I remember saying to the guys, somebody at Sportsnet saying, look, why don't you, do a dozen Bob Cole games a year, original 6 matchups or something like that, or Canadian matchups or something where it's got a little bit of an identity, and I'm not saying go all throwback and, wear powder blues and all that, but something, just, why don't you take the asset you have and make the best of it, and, exploit it in a way, right? Because you own it. You own this brand. And rather than just kind of saying, we're going to cut you down to this number of games and this number of games, and then you're going to disappear and see you, nice to have you, tribute, nice the players saluted you. I think there was a way you could have bridged it where Bob could have retained, dignity is the wrong word, because, but I think that there was a way that they could have maybe made that transition where Bob had a thing. Now, Bob, Bob may well have resisted that. I got to tell you, he may have said, screw that. I don't want any token stuff. I want the Stanley Cup Finals back. But, they weren't willing, and then, other things happened, and pandemics happened, and all kinds of stuff happened. And, they've been scrambling on that broadcast really, since the day they got rid of, Strombolopoulos, and they had to kind of start retrenching.
Yeah. There were mistakes made. Some of them were clear and made clear very quickly, and credit to them, they made the changes. But some of them, and the other thing is too, it was a different world. And now I'm talking about when Bob's in his prime. You go back to when we were younger or whatever, and there wasn't, Amazon wasn't going to be showing games, and Apple and TNT and ESPN. You were getting hockey in more or less one place, and Bob was the guy. Joe Buck gets crushed. I think he's terrific at what he does. I don't think there's many people that can do what he does, but just to have like a Vin Scully, to have one person who's a voice of to have that, to corner that market, to have that kind of pull. I don't know that we'll see that. It's pretty rare.
Oh yeah. No, you won't.
Right. It's hockey. Bob Cole's calling the hockey game every Saturday because he's the one that does it, and no one else really does it. So it's not a bad thing. Just kind of,
you're right, Boom. There's a number one NFL crew for each network. There's somebody who calls the World Series. There's somebody who calls the Super Bowl. But there's not, the guy, right? There's a bunch of guys.
If there is, I feel like it's Al Michaels, right? And I'm sure he has his critics, but to me, I feel like I'm watching a football game when I hear Al Michaels on.
Yeah, but but no one seems to be, those guys go too, right? They get shuffled off to one side, and there'll never be the equivalent of one hockey game in a hockey crazy country a week, on one station, or one guy calling all of the significant playoff games, and that kind of having one person identified with the sport as much as Foster was, or Danny Gallivan was, or Bob was, or Vin Scully was with the Dodgers, or that's over. And again, it doesn't mean there's not a lot of great and different and unique play-by-play guys out there. There still are. But that idea where the voice in your head was only one voice, that's gone.
It's hard to envision somebody capturing the game. Like Peter Maher to me is the Flames.
Yeah.
Rick Jeanneret is
Yeah.
Buffalo.
Mm-hmm.
Bob
Jim
Cole,
Nance is the Masters. That's the only soundtrack one I can think of today.
yeah,
right?
but Bob Cole's hockey, right?
Yeah.
Like he's not regional, he's not specific, he's hockey. So I can't envision. Well, maybe it will happen and time will tell, but just the longevity of it all, the games and decades that he got to call and be that voice for everybody. I just can't envision that happening again.
No.
I can't either. It's interesting. Somebody asked me, I was on with Mitch Melnick in Montreal yesterday talking, and he, talking about Bob, and they said people in Montreal thought that that Montreal was his favorite team, that he was a Habs fan. And of course, Bob would never acknowledge that he was the fan of anybody, because that would get in the way of his neutrality. But but think about the things that he's associated with. He did call those two Habs the 86-93 Stanley Cups for the Habs. But the Islanders dynasty, like all those games are him. The Oilers dynasty, all those games are him. You had the Lanny clip and the Flame Stanley Cup, that's him. Like you can he's identified with, like when Bill Hewitt was calling the Toronto Maple Leafs games, Foster's kid, he was the Toronto guy. And Danny really was the Montreal. He was really the Habs guy in a lot of ways, although we did get some national stuff over the years. But I think you still kind of think of him as the Habs guy. But Bob, as much as he spent a lot of Saturday nights in Toronto, because of those playoffs and because of the international hockey too, he was the voice of Team Canada, and he was, he's Mario's chronicler, right? He attaches to a whole bunch of different things and a whole bunch of different teams.
Yeah.
Yeah, he can bridge Howe to McDavid, probably, right? That's insane.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he hung out with Howe,
Oh man.
He went bowling with Howe, like in Newfoundland. He had Howe out in Newfoundland. There's a million Bob stories about a million things, but yeah, he did. That was before he ever was a hockey broadcaster, but when he was a DJ in St. John's.
So obviously it was a great way for us to get you on. Because you were kind of the multi-tooled athlete. You're a writer with the pipes, you're the narrator, you're doing radio, television, doing all of it. Now you're doing very little of it. Do you miss it? Do you miss some of it? Of that, what are you most missing, I guess, at this point?
I think it does occur to me every once in a while. I miss people. Like now, the people I used to work with, and being in an environment where there were people, colleagues and comrades and all that stuff. Although, of course, the pandemic kind of kicked the crap out of that, right? Like, spent a lot of several years there walking into an empty building, so that was less fun. So I miss the people, and there are days when there's something I really like. When Bob, like yesterday, I did, I kind of. I thought I could do justice to Bob because I knew him pretty well. Sure. And there are, some other folks have done some nice. Elliot Friedman wrote a really nice piece about him on Sportsnet today, for instance, about being kind of the young guy in the crew and joining Hockey Night and working with Bob. But I miss being able to talk about Bob. And occasionally there's something in sports that jumps out where I think, I probably should be the guy talking about this today.
A Brunt essay.
Yeah, or one of those,
and you know what? I don't mind saying, and it's just whatever. Sportsnet dropped the ball on the Cole one yesterday. They had a lot of very nice and touching tributes, but I went to watch the Bob Cole tribute, and it's a bunch of people just talking about him. Well, I want to hear him. I want to hear his voice. I want to hear him talking.
I will say, and again, with certainly no bitterness, there is a piece on there. Say my written piece ran on Sportsnet that I wrote several years ago, right? Because that's when you do kind of anticipate people's passing and have obits in the can, right? So and they did run it with my name on it, so that was nice.
How does that work, by the way?
I don't know, just showed up. Anyway, they own it. So, you know,
It'd be like
they
if
were
you
paying
built
me.
something when you still worked there and they brought it
Yeah,
out on set. It's, you know.
but there was a video with a narration that's on Sportsnet, which does not have my voice on it anymore, which I
Yeah.
did write and did voice.
Really?
Yeah.
Hey,
That's a lot of work, you know, taking that one voice off and putting another voice
it's
on.
a lot of work to be petty bastards.
Yeah,
I
I
you know
kinda
what?
thought
But
so.
they're up for it, so that's good.
I thought it was kind of, I thought it was weak, man. But
Yeah.
you know what can I do? Again, they own the material, they own the content. What can I do?
Well, it's funny because like you talked about this, or at least alluded to it when you were there, that, you know, like part of what your job description was exactly that, to put some stuff in the can when shit hits the fan. And
Mhm.
that's an awkward, weird thing to do because people are still alive when you're doing that, and you have to put yourself in the spot thinking about them as having passed and to summarize their lives, and
Oh,
you might see them down the hall later. Like,
well, and it's also like you're kind of like an insurance guy. Like you're kind of, you have a list and you go, okay,
Yeah.
who's
You did a death
who's
pool.
got the most time left here?
You were running the death pool. That is so dark.
Got to prioritize, right? Like, you know, that guy's not that old, but you know, he lives kind of hard.
Yeah.
So you kind of move him up in the list, right? No, it's honest to God. Yeah, we were Scott Moore, my former boss there, and your former boss, once said that if his line was that if you woke up in the morning and heard me talking about you on television, it meant you were dead.
Oh, Stephen.
Yeah. Well, you know.
You're almost a mortician. Jesus.
Yeah, Grim Reaper. So, yeah. So, but you know, like for somebody like this one was personal, you know, like, so yeah, there's the other ones that sure they can do whatever they want with them, but you know, Bob is my friend.
Yeah.
So I kind of resent this one.
Well, this has been a real treat. I don't know why. You know what it is? Here's what it is. I feel like it's such a nuisance. Hey, we'd love to get you on the show. That's great. Okay. But you're going to need to have a camera. And do you have headphones? And do you have Chrome on your laptop? And if you could make sure you mute the thing and do it. There's so much. I was like, oh, just fuck it. You know, if it was just a phone call, we'd just talk at the phone. But there's some hoops to jump through with this now. But obviously, you're well equipped to jump through.
Well, I just did a couple of clicks and it worked. No,
it worked all right. Yeah. Maybe it's not that big.
We've missed you, buddy. We really have. I feel like we're
guys.
just a bunch of idiots yelling at each other, and sometimes we're right, but most often we're wrong. We need the voice of reason, and that is you, sir.
Well, I do miss our conflaps. It was yeah.
Well, you've answered your phone, so now you're really hooked.
Yeah, so I'll do the next one I'll be out in Newfoundland. I can do it out in the backyard there.
When do you start the pilgrimage?
Yeah.
When does it start?
Yeah, I'm crossing on the 1st of June. I'll be on the boat on the 1st of June.
Okay, so kids, dogs, family members, who's staying, who's going, how's that working?
Well, it's me and the dog going out because we're very compatible, and then other people come after that.
Yeah,
it's a long drive.
The dog. It's not
a long drive. You know,
yeah.
some people are more, attuned for a long drive than others.
Yeah, and everyone's very good and happy with that arrangement.
Yeah, that's
so
true.
Stephen, Dad and the dog are going.
It's not just me that's happy about it.
Both you and the dog have got your head out the window.
Oh yeah, no, we're great, and those who are not in the car with us, they're happy about it too.
100%.
Do you have a favorite moment of that drive? I know, like our family, we do an annual pilgrimage to northern Saskatchewan. It's like maybe 10 days a year, and there's a certain part of the drive I always I get excited. Is it like getting off the ferry because that can be crazy, or is it turning the corner and seeing a certain bay? Like, what is it for you?
Yeah, when I get up, the getting off the boat is great because it's the weather's always horrible in the southwest corner of Newfoundland where you get off. It's always misty and foggy and horrible, and all the Newfoundlanders on the boat are crying, right? Because it's going about how beautiful it is, and they're home, and almost kissing the ground. All the people coming back, so it's always kind of a cool moment when the boat docks. But yeah, when up in Bond Bay where I live there's a moment where you come up over a big hill they call the struggle because going up it in a car used to be a struggle to get to the top. It's very steep. But you come down and the bay unfolds in front of you. There's, mountains on the one side and then the water. And that's when you're there. And I can tell you that road's got all these little twists and turns on it. I could close my eyes. I could do it right now. I could drive that whole thing without even looking.
Yeah.
So that's when I know I'm there.
Well, before you know it, we're already, April's kind of slipped through our fingers. We're heading towards it here. But it's real good to have you on. This is a real treat. We miss you. Love you, pal. Good to see that you're doing so well. And we'll do it again soon.
Yeah, give me a call.
man.
I'd love to do it.
Awesome. Take care, buddy.
All right. See you guys.
There you go. Stephen Brunt, the great Stephen Brunt.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to check out more of our content right here on the Flames Nation YouTube page. We had a bunch of great long form interviews. You can check out some videos we've done as well outside of the studio. And of course, if you want more writing or merchandise stuff, flamesnation.ca or nationgear.ca. Appreciate you watching.